Okie doke. Well, welcome everybody, and hopefully we'll have some other folks joining. But as I mentioned in the emails and the like, this is your opportunity to try and touch base if you've got some issues or some questions. At this point, you should certainly be through chapters 1 through 3, and hopefully have begun chapters 4, getting into 5 a little bit. So I'll throw it open first. Well, let me just, no, I'll throw it open first for questions. I know, Albert, you had said you had a question about something.
Yeah, I just had I'm not even sure how to phrase it. That's how much of a question it is. So you've got two layers of a solar panel, and electrons jump from one to the other, and you have obviously an excess of electrons in the upper layer because of the photons that have been absorbed. Those electrons go through the circuit and come back to the lower panel.
Yeah.
Typically the way concept.
The way that it works. And it's funny because I just did a presentation at a church, in fact, over Sunday, and part of it, they wanted me to explain how photovoltaics works to 5 and 6 year olds. And I pointed out that Albert Einstein won a Nobel Prize for explaining photovoltaics and how it works. So to try and do it to 5 and 6 year olds might be a little bit of an ask, but and plus I informed them I was going to tell them 2 really bad dad jokes at the same time. So, and we had 4 minutes to do it. So basically what you do is there's 2 layers. There's the N layer and the P layer, one for positive, one for negative. And those layers are doped so that the N layer is predisposed to receive a negative charge, and the P level is predisposed to give off a negative charge, or, so that it will be positively charged. So I think of them like magnetized, so that when a photon comes through and knocks an electron loose from its orbit within an atom, there's almost a natural attraction from the P layer to the N layer. So it's predisposed to jump across the band gap that exists there. Now, a solar panel is really nothing more than a diode. So the energy from the photon is enough to knock it across, but there is not enough energy for it to return back to where it wants to be. They usually say that it is left an electron hole in the other layer. So everything always wants to be in balance, in a state of neutrality. So it wants to return back to its place of origin. The only way it can do so is through a circuit. So if a circuit is created, that electron will flow through the circuit to return back to, again, balance. So the N layer will have a negative charge, too many electrons. The P layer will have a positive charge only because it's lost its negative. So the absence of negative makes it positive. And the 2 stupid dad jokes was a photon checks into a hotel, and the hotel says, "How long you staying?" And he goes, "A couple of days." He goes, "But you don't have any baggage?" And he goes, "Yeah, I know, I'm traveling light." So that's the stupid dad joke. And Adam walks into a bar and says, "Hey, you guys, has anyone seen my electron? I lost an electron." And they go, "Are you sure?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm positive." So that's the other stupid dad joke. So anyway, so really all that all that DC electricity is an electron wanting to go home, wanting to go back to its place of origin. We see in batteries that imbalance is created electromechanically through the electrical discharge. With recharging, you're basically putting more electrons over near the negative terminal and leaving holes in near the positive terminal. Here it's done with light. Now, to throw a fly into the ointment, however, unless there is a load to service, those photons do not transfer the electron across that band gap. I think of it like you can have pressure, but you can't have flow with the spigot turned off. Unless there's somewhere for it to go, the electron will not cross the band gap. So that's kind of nice, because without a load to service, a solar panel is completely inert. It's not like a battery where if you touch the terminals, you're going to blow it because it has pent up energy storage. So hopefully, Albert, that answered sort of. The better response is it's magic. That's how this stuff works, right? Light hits sand and you get electricity. How can that not be magic? So
yeah, it seemed to imply that even without a load, there was a current in the P layer, that the holes were getting filled. And I was like, I don't think so.
No.
Okay, good.
No, you can get voltage. You can measure the voltage, the pressure,
right,
but there will be no electric flow without a load to service. Now, you can have a pathway to ground, which creates the load. So you can still discharge that panel and electrocute yourself, if you've created a pathway to ground, because the ground is considered to be a load in that regard. It's at a different level of potential. But and I have seen some YouTube videos where they've taken solar panels in a string and they've done arc welding, by doing that with just the discharge there. But again, they're creating a load by having a pathway to ground. So, all right, any other questions? Okay, while you're thinking of your questions, because I'm sure there are some, let me just jump into the online course. I'm going to share my screen here. Can you all see the screen share there?
Yep.
All right. Okay, good. So, yeah, just to do a little quick review here of where you should have gone through. Hopefully this isn't new to anybody, but you should have jumped in and gone into the growth of the industry, pretty basic stuff, decline of module prices. We're starting to see that, although this year, because of supply chain situations, we have seen the price tick back up just a little bit. Government incentive programs, well, we just saw a lot of changes in the government incentive programs because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So some of the text in there is a little bit out of date, where they've increased it back up to 30% for the next 10 years. And then they've added some incentives at the commercial level, where if you buy domestically produced products, you can get another 10% tax credit. So if you buy domestically or US manufactured solar panels, microinverters, things of that nature, you're going to get a 10% additional. If you're developing your array in a low income area, you'll get an additional 10%. If you're developing it in a brownfield or a polluted area, or one that has traditionally been fossil fuel producing, it will be an additional 10%. So all of those combined, you could get a 60% tax credit on your solar array from the federal government at the commercial level. At the residential level, it's still now just 30%. Although I did just hear a podcast where they're interpreting it, and we're waiting for IRS ruling, that if you use domestic product, it may qualify for an additional 10% tax credit. So you might be as much as 40%. One of the problems with that is at the moment, there are very few domestically produced solar panels, very few domestically produced microinverters, things like that. So, but everybody is rushing into that space. So by the end of this year, I think we'll see 2 or 3 times the amount of US production of these kind of things than we've seen in the past, largely because of this tax incentive. Connecting to the grid, we'll walk through some of that, some of the issues there. Later, we'll get into some of the issues around supply side versus load side connections. How are you going to be physically hooking in your system to your electrical existing electrical system? History of photovoltaics, don't really care that much about, except I think there's maybe one question on the test about history. Certification programs, codes, and standards. Those are, again, fairly self-evident. Solar cells, we touched on some of that. Some of the emerging technology is pretty promising in the world of solar. We've traditionally now seen monocrystalline and polycrystalline panels. Those are silicon-based crystalline panels. They do represent about 90% of the world's embedded solar panel stock. It's split fairly even, 50-50 between mono and poly. Used to be, you'd say, well, monocrystalline are more expensive, polycrystalline a little bit cheaper, a little less efficient. That depends. It really depends. It depends on sale prices and availability of product and the like. But I think it's a fair guide. Thin film has always traditionally been viewed as sort of the Harbor Freight of solar panels. You know, they're cheaper, they're less efficient, they do the job, but not as efficient as silicon. In fact, in Solar Noon Tuesday this week, we just talked about some of the changes in the thin film industry. And most utility scale systems now that are installed use thin film panels. They use cadmium telluride, which is a technology that's really been promoted by First Solar, which is the largest manufacturer of solar panels in the United States. And they're arguing that it absorbs over a wider bandwidth, works better in low light situations, higher temperature situations, has less degrading over time. So they're arguing that initially you'll get 10% or more better production from the thin film panel than silicon, and that only increases over time. They offer a 30-year warranty, and at the end of that warranty period, your panel will produce 90% of what it produced when it was installed. So that is far and away the best warranty system out there in the industry. And this is for a thin film panel. Plus, the thin film panel is only like 6 millimeters thick versus 35 millimeters for a solar panel that's silicon because of the frame. These are frameless panels. They're basically glass on glass with a inkjet printing type membrane in the middle. So that may be the future of solar panels. You know, we may be moving to something like that. Another interesting thing about those panels is they are already having commercial applications where they are translucent or transparent. So you can have solar windows, solar doors. And in fact, in our call, we have a big installer down in Trinidad who they want translucent solar panels because they want to use vegetative growth underneath the solar array. So, so then when you get into agrivoltaics, where you can grow crops under the solar arrays, you don't want complete shade. So to be able to harvest 20% of the sun's energy and let some of it still go through and become as light is a good thing, especially in agricultural situations. So I'm bringing this up because we are still in the floppy disk age of solar. You know, everything we're doing, everything is changing, everything is emerging, and it's an exciting field to be in. So you're right there at the beginning. You're at the Bill Gates, Steve Jobs level of accessing this particular industry. In this, did anybody have any questions about the IV curve? That sometimes throws people for a loop. Is everybody clear about what that is? Give you just a second to fess up. Otherwise, let me see if I can make this a little bit clearer here. I'm gonna go to my whiteboard here, hopefully. Okay, can you guys see the whiteboard here with all right, good. Okay, so the IV curve, this is unique to every single solar panel. So this would be amps. I'll use my mark there. And this will be volts. And of course, I've already used the wrong symbol for that. It should be I for amps in the abstract. And every panel, if this is 0, has an IV curve that's something like this. And there are only a few points on the curve that we're worried about. This point right up here is the maximum theoretical amps that panel can produce under standard test conditions. And that's going to be the ISC, the amps at short circuit. Again, this curve, there are an infinite number of curves for a panel based on conditions. So at this point, we're talking about standard test conditions, and the things that are part of standard test conditions is 1,000 watts per square meter and 25 degrees Celsius, and then also 1.5 atmospheres, but we never really worry about that one. It's really, what is the irradiance, which is 1,000 watts per square meter? What is the temperature? 25 degrees Celsius. That's standard test conditions. Irradiance typically affects amps, and temperature typically affects or most prominently affects voltage. They affect both, but that's where the main effect is. So this would be the theoretical maximum amperage. This is the theoretical maximum voltage. And I shouldn't say theoretical because you can actually measure this, but you cannot measure ISC because amps require current, right? Well, at 0 volts, there is no current. So it just doesn't exist. All right. So then somewhere along this curve is the maximum power point. Okay, I'm going to mute somebody here. I'm getting a little bit of feedback there, or if they could mute it. All right, so somewhere along this curve is the maximum voltage or the maximum power production. And this is the maximum power point. It can be the MPP. It's also sometimes called the Pmax.
I didn't realize it.
They're not really set as far as what the acronym is. So I'm going to mute a couple of them. There we go. So that is the maximum power point. Well, there is an amperage that's associated with the maximum power point. My lines aren't exactly straight. That will be the IMP. And there is a voltage associated with the maximum power point, and that's the VMP. Now, the terminology here can become somewhat confusing because we think about maximum power point voltage would be the maximum voltage that panel produces, but it's not. The VOC is the maximum voltage. The VMP is the voltage it is producing when operating at its maximum power. All right, which is different because at VOC and at ISC, 0 power is produced because amps are 0 at VOC and voltage is 0 at ISC, so 0 power. So along this curve, it just sort of happens that right here, somewhere in that bend is going to be your maximum power point. And that's the rated power of the panel. So when we say this is a 300 volt panel or a 300 watt panel, we're talking about how much it produces at maximum power point under standard test conditions. So that's how we get that. So have I confused everybody? There's no way to determine these. They're simply given to you by the panel manufacturer. You know, they've done the lab tests and they're giving you the ISC, the IMP, the Pmax or the maximum power point, the VMP and the VOC. So why do we care about these numbers? Well, the ISC is the theoretical maximum amperage. That is the number we use when we design the wiring system. We don't want the wires to burst into flames because we put too many amps in them. So we use the theoretical worst case scenario when we're calculating how many amps might be present in the system. So that's used as part of our design criteria. And the VOC is used to make sure our system does not exist or does not exceed the voltage limitations that are imposed by the National Electric Code. So a residential system is 600 volts DC. For residential systems, for commercial systems, it's 1,500 volts, I think. So we use VOC to determine our string size and things like that to make sure we don't exceed that number. But these are real world numbers. These are what it's actually producing, the actual volts and the actual amps. So we need to know those when we're trying to figure out production. So that's why we need those numbers. And then we have to adjust for adjusted conditions, adjusted for temperature, adjusted for irradiance. So I know you didn't have any questions on this before I started talking. Did I confuse everybody to the point where there are now questions about that? Okay, I'll get rid of the whiteboard. Okay, so let's just jump back in here to the screen. So as we're walking down through the IV curve, I know that some of the factors that affect efficiency is, size of the panel. When all things are even, size matters. The quality of the panel is a factor. Irradiance, the temperature, dust. There's a lot of factors that we derate for. The types of the systems that we get into, most people, when they start thinking about solar, they think about standalone systems. Standalone systems are a very small portion of the systems that are installed in developed countries. Most systems are going to be grid-tied systems. Really, we only install standalone when the grid is not available. So when we talk about systems costing $3 a watt or whatever, we're talking about grid-tied systems without batteries. That's the number we're focused on. Up until recently, I would have said 98% of all the systems out there that are being installed are grid-tied, with another 2% coming in at standalone systems. That's changing rapidly. Grid interactive systems are becoming a dominant technology. And grid interactive systems are essentially systems that behave like a grid-tied system when the grid is functioning, but then go into standalone mode when the grid is no longer functioning. And there's a number of reasons why we're moving towards this. But when you get into the design, if any of you guys make this a career or whatever, you're going to find that you're going to be designing for batteries. And more frequently, you're going to be the battery that you're going to be designing for is an electric vehicle. Connecting an electric vehicle to your system and using the batteries that are in that electric vehicle as your battery backup for your home. In fact, I'm doing a system right here in my office that is exactly that. It's an N-phase microinverter system. It incorporates a smart switch where you can connect in an EV charger, charging station into that smart switch. And that smart switch is like an auto transformer, an auto disconnect. So when it senses that the grid goes down, it disconnects the system from the grid. And now you're in standalone operation. Now, it's constantly sensing the grid to see if it reestablishes itself. If it does, then it waits for 5 minutes because sometimes the grid will come up and then drop right back off again. So it doesn't want to keep switching until the grid is stable. But then it'll go back into grid mode. But it then allows you to draw power from your electric vehicle as your battery backup system. But then the system also sends a signal to your inverters to convince it the grid is still functioning. So they'll still keep producing power because most of these inverters have rapid shutdown anti-islanding. So as soon as they lose sight of the grid, they just stop working. right? They turn off because you don't want to be sending power back to the grid and electrocute alignment. But part of these grid interactive systems is that they send a signal to the inverters, convincing them that the grid is still functioning. So they're still working. So now you get your array is producing if there's sunlight, you've got battery backup, you're disconnected from the grid, so you can't feed back or island back to the grid. So now you're in standalone mode. And some of these electric vehicles have very, very robust batteries. The Ford F-150, the Lightning, the electric vehicle version, has 132 kilowatt hour battery. Well, right there is enough power to run a typical suburban home with no moderation of their consumption. Well, the average home uses about 30 kilowatt hours a day. So right there, you've got like 4 days plus of battery backup. And the Chevy Tahoe electric vehicle has a 200 kilowatt hour battery. So that would be enough to run your home for about 7 days with no grid connection. So these batteries are great, pretty robust. The thing that still needs to be determined is, does that void your automobile warranty, by discharging? These things are designed to be charged and then run. So if you're using it as a battery backup for your home, do you begin to void the warranty from your electric vehicle? And that's something that they're still working out the protocols on. But that's where we're going to be moving. All right, basic electrical concepts.
Hey, Jay.
Yeah.
Quick question on the battery. I thought I heard you say somewhere that there was a restriction on how many batteries you could have, like in your basement near your system. Is that true?
Yes, it depends on your location. But yeah, some of the municipalities are beginning to restrict the size of the battery system that you can have hooked up to your residential. That's going to be hard to enforce, especially if you use an EV as your battery source. But then the bigger concern there is that the most recent, it's not in the electrical code, not in the NEC, but it's in it's like the NFPA, trying to remember it, like 628 standard, that is a fire code standard, where they are mandating that the batteries be stored outdoors so that they're no longer allowed to be in your home. And they have to be, certain distance from the wall of your home and a certain distance from the windows and the doors. And in a commercial situation, they must be in a climate controlled room, that's got a sprinkler system and an eye washing station and so many exchanges of air, ventilation and all of that. So they've really kind of gone overboard with this based on deep cell lead acid battery issues of outgassing of hydrogen and things of that nature. At the very moment that everybody is transitioning to lithium ion that has no outgassing, I guess they're concerned maybe there's thermal runaway issues where if a battery is damaged, it might combust, but it's more likely to be physically damaged outdoors than indoors. And they haven't factored in climate control of these batteries because these batteries do not work well in freezing temperatures. So they're saying, take it outside. Well, that's going to mandate that you put it in some sort of temperature controlled casing, which is going to generate, it's going to consume energy to climate control these batteries. So this is in the, I think it was in the 2022. It just went into effect, and most jurisdictions adopt these things like 3 years after they're produced. So you're not going to run into a situation yet where this is the law of the land, but it's out there on the horizon. as soon as they adopt this standard as part of their local codes and laws. And I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail and that these things will be eliminated before they're actually enforced, because it doesn't make any logical sense. In fact, it's gone so far that says if you use your electric vehicle as a battery source, you can't park it in your garage for more than 30 days. And they're unclear about whether that's 30 days at a time or 30 days in total. But you know, it's crazy. I mean, they're saying you can't put a stationary battery in your garage, but you can park your electric vehicle in your garage as long as you don't hook it up to your house. I mean, where's the logic in any of that? So let's hope they do away with it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. That was probably more than you ever wanted to know. So, all right. Anybody else have any questions as we're chatting through some of this stuff? Otherwise, I'll just quickly work down the list here about electricity. Another thing that we get into, well, one of the things, if you're brand new to electricity and you weren't born with this knowledge, so don't be embarrassed that, you know, it's all brand new to you. But the thing that some folks have difficulty remembering is the difference between series and parallel. And when you hook things together in series, the voltage increases, but the amps remain the same. And that's usually a positive to negative to positive to negative connection. Whereas when you hook things up in parallel, amps increase, but the voltage remains the same. Most of our systems are a combination of both. We typically do series connections to get the voltage to whatever voltage requirement our loads need. You know, in a standalone system, if we've got 48-volt light bulbs or something, we need a 48-volt power source. So I might hook 4 12-volt batteries together in series to get to that 48 volts. Then I hook things together in parallel to get more power over longer periods of time. You know, so to increase the robust or the size of my system, so that I can get more power over time. So we do a series and parallel kind of design for our battery bank systems and for our arrays. Those are fairly typical that we do both. There's no easy way to remember it except to just remember it. I always think of just there's an A in parallel, so that's for amps. There's no A in series. That's some little mnemonic you can use. Resistance is a thing that comes into play in solar primarily around voltage drop. So the water analogy about power is good. It's not accurate, but it's good to understand. So you think about DC electricity, especially, like amps is the size of the pipe and voltage is the pressure that the water is under. So in combination, that's how much water is going to flow. You can have a big pipe and low pressure, or you can have a small pipe and high pressure. You're going to get the same amount of water. Resistance is the friction inside the pipe as the water moves through it, right? So you lose some of the pressure over distance due to resistance. So how do you reduce resistance in your system? Because resistance is just lost energy. Resistance will almost always show itself in terms of heat, right? You lose electrical power. Well, energy is never created or destroyed. It simply changes form. So it becomes heat. And that's one reason why you get heat buildup within conduits and things like that due to resistance. Well, you want to minimize resistance as much as possible. So how do you do that? You shorten the length of your circuit. That's one way, but hopefully you've designed your system to be as short as possible anyway. You can use better wire. That's another thing. But more typically, you're going to use bigger wire. The bigger the pipe, the less the resistance. So you increase the resistance, or you decrease resistance by putting in bigger wire. Another way that you can deal with resistance, it doesn't decrease the amount of resistance, but it decreases the effective resistance, is increase the voltage of your system. And so a 12-volt system, if you're losing 6 volts out of 12 volts, you've lost half of your power. But if it's a 600-volt system and you lose 6 volts, you've only lost 1% of your power. So resistance is linear. It doesn't care about what the voltage of the system is. Over 100 feet or whatever, you might lose 6 volts. Well, if it starts out at 12, you end up with 6, you've lost half your power, but 1%. So this is one reason why we want to push the voltage of our systems as high as possible, because, well, there's a lot of advantages of having very high system voltages. I'll stop the share there so you can see. But anyway, currently in the United States, it's 600 volts. There's no reason for that, right? In Europe, it's 1,000 volts. In commercial systems, it's 1,500 volts. Why is it 600 volts? Well, my expectation or my assumption is back when they wrote the NEC for the first time, they didn't understand, not for the first time, but the first time they incorporated photovoltaics, they didn't understand it. You know, it was a new technology. Well, electricity, low voltage is considered 600 volts and below. So they said, this might be dangerous. Let's stick it in the low voltage category. So 600 volts maximum. Totally arbitrary. There's no reason, there's no safety reason for that. You know, if I've got a 5,000 watt system, if I run it at 1,000 watts or 1,000 volts, I'm only going to have 5 amps, right? Because watts equals amps times volts. But if I run it at 50 volts, then I'm going to have 100 amps. Well, 100 amps is a lot more inherently dangerous than 5 amps. So the voltage, yeah, it's dangerous, but the amps are typically what kill you. So the higher the voltage, you could argue it's actually safer than getting a low voltage, high amperage system. And the higher the amps, the bigger the wire, the more expensive, the more disconnects, the more expensive the disconnects are, the more expensive or the more number of overcurrent protection you're going to need. So you could, if we increase the voltage of a residential system to say 1,500 volts, we would probably reduce the cost of the system by about 25%. So I keep thinking that the NEC is going to come around to increasing the voltage. Once again, there's no real reason why it's there, except inertia. And plus, now a lot of the manufacturers make products that are designed for that voltage. And since manufacturers are the people who write the code primarily, I'm sure they're going in there going, hey, I don't want to retool my factory. You know, let's just leave it where it is. So in fact, in the last revision of the code, or maybe the one before, it used to be we were restricted to 50 volts for batteries inside a building. Companies like Tesla, they were coming out with these big battery systems that it cost them more money to keep the voltage low. They wanted like 600 volt batteries, because power is coming in at 600 volts. Now you have to reduce it to 50. Then you send it out to an inverter and it's increased to 240 AC or whatever. You could make a lot, the battery could be more profitable if it was a higher voltage. So they lobbied in the NEC, and they created another category, basically inaccessible batteries, you know, inaccessible proprietary batteries, essentially, which they say now in the NEC, if the battery system cannot be accessed, if the terminals cannot be accessed by the consumer, so it requires a trained technician to go in to actually touch the terminals of the system, then voltage is unlimited. And that was all due to lobbying by companies like Tesla and LG Chem and the like. So if we get some big player out there who lobbies for higher voltage systems, hopefully we'll see them in the marketplace in the residential world sooner than later. So, all right. I think I've touched on a few things that weren't in the book. I was trying to give some value here, if possible. So I'll throw it open one more time for questions to anybody before we sort of sum up. Anybody got a question? You'd have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
So I have been having trouble accessing the online textbook. When I clicked the link you sent in the email, it said page not found.
Page not found. Okay. What's the name there?
Zach Fox.
Zach. Oh, Zach. Okay. Zach, let me send you. Yeah. Let me double check the link. Is anybody else having trouble on it?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm having trouble with the link, but if you could send it to me again, that'd be great.
Okay.
Albert.
All right. Maybe what I'll do is when I send out this next notice, I'll just resend a link to everybody. That way, if anybody's having trouble with it. And like I said, as soon as I get the confirmation of everybody through Hiram and Oberlin, we'll send out paper textbooks as well. But still waiting on that. And yeah, then we get the next week I'll send this link of this video with it. Hopefully you'll see that we have the videos that go through the end of the chapter reviews. So if you find that helpful, I try and explain some of how we got to the answers. So that's another resource there. And once again, I'll reiterate that if you run into a question as you're studying, feel free to send me an email. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. So you don't have to wait till next Tuesday. Just send an email saying, hey, I have a question about this. I don't quite understand it, because I don't want you to run in circles not understanding what you're studying, because it may, cause problems. I want you to understand it as you're studying it. All right. So.
Hey, Jay.
Yeah.
Could you send the chapter 5 review, or is that on the next one?
Yeah, it'll be on the next one. Yeah. So
Okay.
as soon as, it'll be on this one. I mean, I guess I could send the entire schedule with all of the end of the chapter reviews if everybody gets, I just didn't want to overwhelm people with data, but I can expand that list out, and then we'll just keep adding the weekly review videos, but it gives you a sense of where you are in the whole schedule as well. So.
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of those people, some folks like you apparently want to run ahead a little bit. So that's good. Right. Expand it. Okay. So other than that, I think we're right on track. I haven't yet, but I'll go in. I can monitor to see how people are doing, how far you are in the system, things like that. So I'll do a quick run through to see if anybody, if somebody at this point has not actually accessed it at all, I'll contact them directly just to say, hey, is there a problem? So. All right. So we'll see you then next Tuesday, 1:00. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, just send me an email. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you, Jay.